Good evening, everyone. Hope you are all doing well. Tonight, in Hashem, we're going to be learning Maseches Eruvin, Daf Chaf Tes, and we're starting about 5 lines from the bottom, the last of the middle width lines on Chaf Ches and Beis at the 2 dots, which begins with the words Gufa Amar Rav Yehuda. Tonight, primarily, we're going to be focusing on different shiurim, different limits and allowances in regards to what can be and should be used for Eruv. To make an Eruv. Remember, the parak we're learning is B'chol Me'arvin, and hopefully that will allow for us to get a little bit of a tfisa for what the appropriate shear is. I think some of us may know just from around the block that the shear that we typically speak about is shtei sudos. We're going to see some gradations of that. Does it have to be one food or two foods? Can it be many foods in smaller portions? We'll dig into that as well. But our starting point is actually in regards to something that we spoke about yesterday, which is some of the products of the statement that was made by Rabbi Yehuda, who was a Talmud of both Rav and Shmuel, the famous Rabbi Yehuda, Bar Ilai, and what I believe it's Bar Ilai, but he certainly is a Talmud of Rav and Shmuel. This is the Amora, not the Tana. And he is going to carry over today as well, so let's jump in. 6 lines from the bottom, Daf Kav Ches Mid Beis. Kufa Amar Rav Yehuda Marav Kshos v'Chaziz me'arvin bahen. You are allowed to make an eruv with kshos and chaziz. Those are shoots, and chaziz is unripe types of growths and grains. Not only can you be ma'ariv with them, but also mubarchan aleim borei pri ha'adama. Now, as we learned yesterday in regards to the discussion of hearts of palm, one of the aspects that we utilize when determining if something should be a shahakol or if something should be borei pri ha'adama is whether or not it's in its final form, or whether or not it's in its official form, I guess would be another way to say it. And we learned this machlokes yesterday with hearts of palm. According to one shita, we learned that, well, it's going to harden. It's not really the fruit of the tree. It's not really the vegetable of the tree. It happens to be that there's a piece of the tree. So then here, what we're seeing from the Gemara is that in regards to kshos and chaziz, Rav is teaching us that you're allowed to use them for Eruv, and the bracha is borei pri ha'adama. So asks the Gemara, kshos bekama, in regards to shoots, bekama, what is the shear to utilize that for, Eruv? So says the Gemara, Kida Amar Rav Yechiel kimelo yad. That is the opinion that says that Rav Yechiel holds that it should be kimelo yad, a handful. Hachanami kimelo yad, just like we'll see soon where the original place was, but where Rav Yechiel said kimelo yad, but certainly that applies back here. Somebody texted in that they can't hear me. It is my assumption that others of you can hear me. If someone else could text in the chat, just so that I know that if the issue is just with one person's computer or if I'm just talking to myself right now, that would be helpful. And if no one can, that's fine. Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up that people can hear me. Michael, I'm not sure what to tell you. I hope you're able to figure it out, or that you have figured it out. So says the Gemara, the 5 lines from the bottom, chaziz bekama. What would be the shear for an eruv for chaziz, for this grain that's still green? It's a relatively unripe version of the grain. So that says the Gemara, Amar Rabba bar Tuvia bar Yitzchak Amar Rav Kimalo Ozilta de Ikri. An ikar in Hebrew and even in modern Hebrew is a farmer, and an ozilta in Aramaic is a bundle. So like when you're driving into southern Illinois or into parts of farmland in the United States of America, you see these rolls of hay that are of an approximately similar size. So not identical to that, of course, but they had some type of system in place to organize and to collect the bales of whatever material they were collecting. So this is Ozilta de Ikri. It is the farmer's bundle, whatever that means. In volume, we don't know. Amar of Chilkia bar Tuvia, another product. Me'arvin bekalya. We are allowed to make an eruv out of kalya. What's kalya? Rashi, 2 lines from the bottom. Dibra hamaskol kalya. Kelach. A kelach in Hebrew is a stalk. Kelach shel esev. It's a stalk of some type of grass. The kasha ke'etz, and it is as hard as wood. So if it's as hard as wood, asks the Gemara, bekalya salka daitach. I mean, come on, you can't be ma'arev on something that's hard as wood. It has to be a food product. Even if you want to argue, like the Mishnah said, that even if the person's a nazir, you can still use wine, but l'chol hapachos, it's chazi for other people. But here, nobody can eat a kelach, and even if you do, then for sure we did just say but l'daitel eitzel kol adam. So then how can this be that kalya is an option? So answers the Gemara, you're right, I didn't mean the stalk itself. Answers the Gemara, Ella biyarka de kalia. We're talking about the leaves or the vegetation that grows off of the stalk of the kalia. But of course, it's of course the case that we are not allowed to use the kalia itself as an eruv. Fine. So now we've determined what the kalia is that we're talking about. We're talking about the leaves of the kalia. And then answers the Gemara Bekama, not answers, asks the Gemara Bekama, what is the shear with which we are allowed to use kalia? So there answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Yechiel Kimalo Yad. This is our actual Mari Makom of Rav Yechiel, because just if you keep a finger right here, Amar Rav Yechiel Kimalo Yad, if you look up 2 lines, it says, Kid de Amar Rav Yechiel Kimalo Yad, like he said, and then after that, on that 5th line from the bottom, it said, Hachanami. So this is the actual Mari Makom, where we see that Rav Yechiel utilizes Kimalo Yad. It's actually by Kalia, and it was extrapolated back to the world of Kshos before to show that this is a normal way that we measure certain types of grains and certain types of vegetation as it relates to Eruvin. And we're going to see this yet again in a moment. It says the Gemara, Rav Yirmiyah nafak l'kiryasa. Rav Yirmiyah was in a village. Ba'umine mahu la'arev b'pulan lachin. Are we allowed to use beans that have moisture to them? They're not very hard beans. They're a little bit softer beans. Are we allowed? Lo haba biyada, he didn't have it in his hand. This line is a line that's referenced in other frames. We've seen this a number of times in Shas already. Lo haba biyada, he didn't have it in his hand. And this is actually a subtle hint to the idea that we should have Talmudo biyado, that a person should always have the Talmud in their hand. And that it should always be mechudadin beficha. It's hard to do this with Daf Yomi because of the rate and because of the pace, but that is the dream. That is the ideal. That things should be mechudadin beficha, and that when people ask us a question, we should, in theory, halavaya, we should all be zoche. We should, in theory, be able to have that recall, so that it's Talmudo biyado. This is just a plan. Whereas lo haba biyade, he didn't have an answer to this question. It wasn't shogor b'fiv. He didn't have the clear answer. Kiyasa lebei medrasha. When he went to the base medrash to learn, they talked it out. Amrulay, everyone responded. Amrulay, hachi amar Rav Yanai ma'arvin b'pulim lachin. So there we see that one can be ma'arev b'pulim lachin. V'kama amar Rav Yechiel kimalo yad. And this is yet another reference to Rav Yechiel's. This is the 3rd time that we see this already. The Rav Yechiel is of the opinion that it is malo yad, that it's a handful. Amar Rav Hamnuna me'arvin b'tradin chayin. We are allowed to be ma'arev. We can make an eruv out of tradin, which are beets chayin, raw beets. We are allowed to use raw beets. Okay, says the Gemara, Eini, is that true? Last line of Kav Ches Mid Beis as we turn to Chav Tes Mid Aleph. V'ha'amar Rav Chizda, silka chaya katil gavra chaya. If you have silka chaya, if you have beets that are raw, then katil, it will kill gavra chaya. It'll kill a person who is also chaya. Now, here chaya means alive, it doesn't mean raw. But the point is that if you eat raw beets, that those are dangerous. So how are we even discussing being ma'arev with it? Can you be ma'arev with arsenic? Can you be ma'arev with snake poison? Can you be ma'arev with anything that's inedible and or dangerous? Of course not. So then what's the havamin of the Gemara here? How can you tell me, in the name of Rav Hamnuna, middle of the bottom line, that ma'arvin b'tradin chayin, if Rav Chizda taught that it's dangerous to eat silka chayin, that you're not allowed to eat that, which is beets which are raw? Turning to the top of Chav Tes Mid Aleph, says the Gemara, hahu bebashil v'lo bashil. In one of the cases, you have to check out Rashi here, Bashil v'lo bashil is a phrase of the Gemara where it's kind of ripe, but it's not totally ripe. It's not totally fresh off the tree in this case of bashil v'lo bashil. But wait, which one's the safe case? So Rav Hamnuna said me'arvin b'tradin chayin. That must be where it's allowed. And what was Rav Chizda talking about? That was hahu b'bashil v'lo bashil, says Rashi, top page. Hahu b'bashil v'lo bashil katil gabra. That's the dangerous version. So that's how we can clearly understand the machlokas between what seemed to have been a machlokas between Rav Hamnuna and Rav Chizda. Rav Hamnuna was of the opinion that it's mutter to make an eruv out of tradin chayin, out of raw beets. Rav Chizda said it's dangerous. Answers the Gemara, Rav Hamnuna was talking about when they're totally raw. Rav Chizda was talking about when it was only partially raw. You began the cooking process at that point. As it's transitioning from raw to less raw, it becomes dangerous and you should not be able to consume it. Ika de amre. There are those who flip this version of this discussion about tradin chayin on its head. Ika de amre, amar Rav Hamnuna, ein me'arvin b'tradin chayin. This is the opposite of what we had. We said that Rav Hamnuna said it's mutter to be me'arev with tradin chayin, with raw beets. Here the Gemara presents it a little bit differently. Rav Hamnuna says you're not allowed. The Amar Rav Chizda, now he uses Rav Chizda as a support instead of as a question on him. The Amar Rav Chizda, silka chaya katel gavra chaya. So says the Gemara, the reason why Rav Hamnuna in version 2 was of the opinion that ein me'arvin b'tradin chayin was because of Rav Chizda, who says that raw beets are dangerous. We see that there are people who taka eat them and they don't die. We eat beets all the time. Not me personally, but a lot of people eat beets all the time. So we see that it's not a dangerous food. So how does Rav Hamnuna get out of it? I'll add, how does Rav Hamnuna and Rav Chizda get out of this quandary? Answers the Gemara, Hasam the bashil velo bashil. When is it that we say that people eat them and they don't die? That's when it's bashil velo bashil. It's only partially cooked. Now, one of the most critical distinctions to understand between version 1 and version 2 is the conclusion, which is that bashil velo bashil, according to version 1, is the dangerous version, and bashil velo bashil in version 2 is not the dangerous version. In all of these cases, and I've mentioned this before in the name of many Meforshim, I believe the Chassam Sofer prominently stated this, that we are not allowed to follow the guidelines, the tivusa ulagriusa, of health and medicines of old. We don't know what we're talking about. We're reading the words, true, but we don't really know what bashil velo bashil means. It's hard to know what it means considering that people eat beets all the time. It's a regular routine food and it is not a dangerous food. So because of that, it makes it a little difficult for us to understand what's going on here, but just highlighting that the Gemara does in fact reverse course on how we understand Rav Hamnuna. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chizda, Tav shel shel tradin, if you have a food that's made with tradin, that's made with beets, Yafe lelev v'tov le'einayim, it's good for your heart and it's good for your eyes. V'kol shekem livnei me'ayim, it's as well very good for your stomach. Again, against the version of how dangerous it is in the earlier case. Amar Rabbi, we had this exact Gemara earlier. Maseches Shasir writes that it's in Brachos Lamed Tes. That was a long time ago. Shabbos was 157 blot, and whatever Brachos I think was 64. So we're going back into the 30s of Brachos. It's almost 200 blot ago. So it says the Gemara as follows. Amar Abaye, when do we say that it's true that the tradin is good for your heart and that it's good for your eyes and good for your stomach? Amar Abaye, v'hu yasiv abetafe, it's on top of the oven, the avid tuch tuch, and it makes the sound of bubbling. We mentioned this then, that this is the onomatopoeia version of the Gemara, that they're actually giving you a language of how do we, it's kind of like when we'd say, bring it to a boil or to a simmer. That would be our parlance. But either way, however you define it, it doesn't make a difference. It's basically tuch tuch, it's making that sound. You could look at Rashi here, 4 lines from the top of the page. The avid tuch tuch, look at the end of that Rashi, and it says, Kimashmiya kol ze tuch tuch, it's the sound that it makes on the oven. Amar Rabba, 8 lines down. Amar Rabba, hareini kiven azoi b'shukei Tveria. He says, I am like Ben Azoi in the marketplaces of Tveria. What is he talking about? So we need Rashi for this to give us some background. Rashi, 7 lines down, approximately. Tibur Hamaskal Hareini Kiven Azai B'Shukei Tveria. Rashi says that what was going on with Ben Azai and Shukei Tveria. So Rashi says, Yoma B'dicha Havalei L'Rabba. What was Ben Azai doing that Rava was mimicking? There was a day that was like a little bit more light, a little bit more fun, I guess like an outing of some kind. The Amar Lahula Talmida, when he said to his students, Hashta Tzili Datoi, the Hareni Mizuman Lahashi Becharifus, the Chol Mishi Yashileni, Ke Ben Azoi, Shahedorish B'Shukei Tveria. I'm ready to take any question you want. It's a question answer session. I'm ready to take any question that you want. Feel free to throw them at me. No problem at all. Below Haya B'Yamav Oker Harim. Kimoso, there was no one who was as sharp as he was. Omer Kol Chachmei Yisrael Lefanai Klipas Hashum Chutz Min Hakerach Hazeh. They used to say about him that of how remarkable he was. Okay, let's go back in the Gemara. So now we know what's going on with Rava and his comparison to Ben Azai. It's Q&A day in the marketplace. You can ask him anything you want. First question on everybody's mind, of course, has to do with Eruv, Pasha. That would be the first question that everybody would ask. Amar Le'ahu Me'Rabbanan L'Rabba Tapuchim Bekama. This is question number 1 of all the questions in the world. What is the volume of apples that makes for a kosher Eruv? Would not have been my question. So says the Gemara, Amar Le, Rava says back to the Talmud, what are you talking about? You're allowed to use apples. So apples today, we know they're ubiquitous. I mean, we all have them in our kitchens and in our stores, and we have 10 different versions of them. You've got Gala and Granny Smiths and Macintosh. There's a whole bunch of different kinds. So of course today it's much more commonplace to see them, but apparently it wasn't as common then because Rava hesitated. So they said back to Rava, Velo, you're not allowed to use apples to be ma'arid, but we have a Mishnah that indicates that we are allowed. It says the Mishnah, Kol ha'ochlin mitzarfen lifsol sagvia b'chatzi pras. This is a din that we know that a person cannot typically become tameh from touching a food. However, if a kohen who is generally speaking allowed to eat truma eats food that's tameh in a certain volume, then he does become tameh to some degree. So says the Gemara, all foods joined together lifsol sagavia, to make the person, to make the body, technically a corpse, that's how we understand gavia, but it means to make the kohen, to make the body tameh, bechatzi pras. If you eat a chatzi pras, then you're problematic. How much is a chatzi pras? Rashi, dibur hamaschil lifsol sagavia. He translates all of this. But if you look down halfway down through Rashi, about 5 lines into that Rashi, he says dahainu shnei beitzim. This is a large share. A beitza is 2 kazesim, so this is 4 kazesim. Basically, a volume of 4 slices of white bread. Could be something along those lines, approximately. So if a person ate that amount of food and the food was itself tameh, afalpi that generally speaking, a person can't become tameh from touching food that's tameh if you're a kohen. But we are matame food, but food's not matame us. But if you eat bechatzi pras, if you eat that shear of 4 kazesim, 2 kibetzim, so then you got a problem. Then you can't eat truma anymore. So this Mishnah, which indicates that, also continues. Uvamazon shtei sudos la'eruv. We also say that all foods join together for shtei sudos la'eruv. Apples, oranges, meat, chicken, fish, doesn't make a difference. It all combines. Uchabetzo, it also adds into the volume of chabetzo latame tumas ochlin. It also adds in regards to making foods into a shear that's ra'oi to become tame. So says the Gemara, what's wrong with apples? If we see that all foods are mitzdarif, so why Rava would you exclude apples? So says the Gemara, what are you talking about? What kind of question is that? If you want to say that the reason why we thought from this Mishnah that apples should be included in regards to making an Eruv, well, because of the word kol, well, we should already know what the answer is to that because we spent the whole day discussing it. The hani b'nei achila ninhu, and therefore apples are shaykh, they're considered food. What does that have to do with anything? That's not inspiring. You didn't prove to me anything. If the reason why that Mishnah is such a raya for you that apples should be part of the world of food for Eruv, the word kol shouldn't be the reason, because kol we know that is not always as exhaustive and inclusive as we think it is. Elamishum, maybe you'll say to katani uvemazon shtei sudos le'eruv uchabeitza latame tumas ochlin v'hani nami b'nei tmuye tumas ochlin, and maybe the other parts of the Mishnah which speak about these two different worlds of mazon shtei sudos and kibeitza latame tumas ochlin. Maybe you'll say that it's included there because it's a food. So the Gemara strangely stops very abruptly. Normally, when we see this structure in the Gemara, we would say as follows. We would have said velo. Oh, wait a minute. You think apples are problematic? Well, it's not. We have a Mishnah that says this. And then the Gemara says, wait a minute. If you're saying the reason is X, you're wrong. If you're saying the reason is Y, then 1, 2, 3. But we don't have the rest of that structure. The Gemara just stops here and seems to embrace this second approach, that really the Mishnah that's being used as a support to allow apples, this is the pushback against Rabbi, because Rabbi said we're not really allowed to use apples, or at least he said it in question form. So here it seems to be that the Gemara embraces that possibility that an apple can be used, vikama, and in turn it immediately asks, and what's the volume of apples? Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman tapuchan bekav. It's an amount, it's a kav, it's a large number of apples. Says the Gemara, 1/3 of the way down, 2 lines before the widest lines. Mesive, I have a question on the shear that you just gave me. You said that tapuchim are bekav, but Mesive, Reb Shimon ben Elazar teaches us an important piece of Torah. Let's see what he teaches us. Omer, he says, uchla tavlin, and uchla is a very small amount. It's 1/8 of a liter, Rashi writes. Or you can give a poor person, we'll see Rashi in a minute to explain, you can give a poor person this small amount of tavlin, which is spices, v'litra yerek, a liter, quote unquote, of yerek, of vegetables, ve'asara egozim, 10 nuts, v'chamisha afar sekin, 10 peaches, u'shnei rimonim, 2 pomegranates, ve'esrog echad. What is all of this talking about? It sounds like a basic shopping list. So take a look at Rashi. Dibur Hamaschel, Reb Shimon ben Elazar, a little bit above where we are. We're on the first of the widest lines. And this Rashi's an inch above where we are. Dibur Hamaschel, Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Rashi writes, B'maiser ani, shemechalko le'anim harbe al hagoren kai. We're talking about giving out Maiser ani, which only took place within 2 of the years of the Shemitah cycle. I believe it was Shlishi and Shishi on the 3rd and 6th year. And Rashi here points out, but Maiser ani, okay. Rashi says, V'ka'amar, what's Reb Shimon ben Elazar teaching us? Ein pochsin le'ani begoren mehaishir. You're not allowed to give an ani less than all of these items. This is the basic handout from whatever the local government is. This is the basic handout that everybody gets. So says the Gemara, we're also going to extend this. It's not only true by Meiser Ani. Says the Gemara, first of the longest lines. Amar Gorsak bar Dari, Gorsak, person's name. Mishmei de Rab Menasya bar Shigovli, Mishmei de Rav. So basically, it's going back 3-4 generations into the Amoraim. And what do we see that is said here in regards to this din that we learned? V'chein le'eruv. We also see that this allocation is considered sufficient to make an eruv. So which part of this statement is going to be the question of the Gemara? It says the Gemara, Bahani Nami, these apples, lehavu ki afarsikin. They should be just like peaches. Why would you distinguish in the shear of apples to say that it's a kav when afarsekin in this Mishnah, when speaking about Meiser Ani, is 5 afarsekin, 5 peaches, and then Rav teaches us that it's the same for Eruv? Why are you saying that apples are treated differently than afarsekin? They should have the same exact shear. Let's assume that be'erech, they're about the same size. Let's assume that be'erech, they have approximately the same nutritional value. Like, it's just not so much of a difference. So why are you distinguishing between apples, which is a kav, and peaches, which are 5, only 5 peaches? So answers the Gemara, second line, middle of the page, Hani chashive, Hani lo chashive. Between the two, one is more important than the other. And therefore, the one that's more important is a smaller shear, obviously, because it has more chashiva. So we need less of it to prove our point. We need less of it to make an eruv. And in regards to apples, which I presume at the time were less common, Habahani lo chashive. Now, on this story, we pointed out from the Mishnah about Meiser Ani that Rav taught us the din v'chein le'eruv, that we extended the shiurim of Meiser Ani into the world of Eruv. But the Gemara has a problem with that. Amar Rav Yosef, Sharale Mari, le Rav Menasya bar Shigovli. Hashem should forgive Rav Menasya bar Shigovli because he made a mistake. Now, who's talking now? Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef was a 3rd century Amora. He was a Talmud of Rav Yehuda. We've seen this line, Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Amar Rav Yosef, we've seen this many times. So he's representing Rav here as the grandchild generation, as it were. He's a Talmud of a Talmud. His Rebbe's Rebbe was Rav, and he's bothered by this. And he says that when the Gemara extends the shiurim of Meiser Ani to the world of Eruv, there was an error. Ana amrisa nehale amas nisin, v'hu amra abraisa. When did Rav actually teach it? He taught it on a Mishnah. But what we just learned it on of Meiser Ani was a brisa. V'hu amra abraisa. Ditnan. What is the actual marimakom where Rav said the words v'chein le'eruv? Where was this? Let's see. Says the Gemara, Ditnan, in pochsen la'ani begoren mechatzi kav chitin. How much can you give a poor person from the goren? You can give them chatzi kav chitin, a half a kav of wheat, the kav se'orin, a whole kav, a full kav of se'orin of barley flour. Reb Meir Omer chatzi kav se'orin. You can even give half of the barley flour. You don't need to give a full kav. The kav v'chetzi kusmin, and you can have to give 1.5 kavan of kusmin, of another grain. The kav grogeris, and you have to give a kav of dried fruits. Oh, manadvela, or these dates that are like packed into like a tight little cake. Continuing this Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva Omer pras v'chetzi lug yayin. The shear for wine in regards to the poor person is a pras v'chetzi. That's 1.5 lug yayin. Rabbi Akiva Omer revius. No, the shear for the poor person is less. It's only a revius. Continuing the Mishnah still further, revius shemen. The Tanna Kama is of the opinion that it has to be a revius of oil. Rabbi Akiva Omer shminis. No, only has to be half of that. It doesn't have to be a whole revius. It can even be an eighth. Ushe'ar kol haperos. All other fruits, all other fruits and vegetables, they only have to, the volume has to be that, had it been that they were sold, the revenue you would generate would be equivalent to shtei sudos. This is where Rav said is then not by the brisa of Meiser Ani that we discussed. Where was this? This was 3 lines before. Where's Rav Shimon ben Elazar? It's the second of the second to last of the shortest lines, where we saw these shiurim about Tavlin and about Yerek and Egozin and Afarsekin and Rimonim and Esrog. Now this Mishnah is also about Meiser Ani. It's talking about grains instead of fruits. So because of that, the Gemara says, Why are you making us think? Who cares where Rav said it? It applies to both. It applies to everything. Rav's statement is not unique. All he's highlighting is that Meiser Ani shiurim apply to Eruv also. So if he's saying it about the Mishnah that deals with fruits, wouldn't he also say it about the brisa? If he says it about the brisa that deals with fruits, wouldn't he also say it about the Mishnah that speaks about grains? Why do we care where we attribute Rav to? Why does what was the person's name who needed the forgiveness? Why does Gursag Bar Dari need forgiveness from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Sharli. Why does he need that? So says the Gemara, Ilema, 2/3 of the way down, Chavtes Madal. Ilema, if you want to say, Bishum de Katani Bahach Tavlin, in the Brisa of Reb Shimon ben Elazar, it spoke about Tavlin. The Tavlin la bnei achila ninhu, and that's really not a food. No one would ever say, oh, you know what, I'm going to bring my pepper with me and make it an eruv. I'm going to bring my garlic salt. I'm going to bring a whole container of paprika. No one would say that. It's not a food. So if that's what you're concerned about, atu hacha, if that's your concern, then milok tani, don't we also have chitin usor and la bnei achila ninhu? In those forms that we hand them out, nobody eats flour straight. Nobody does that. That's also not a meichel. So if your concern is that the Bryce of Reb Shimon ben Elazar included Tavlin, and the Mishnah that we're dealing with includes, you're saying that that's going to include chitin usorin. None of them are bnei achila. Manavshach. No matter how it works out, it doesn't work. It's not a problem. Says the Gemara, no, because that Bryce speaks about wine. Let's continue. It speaks about and because this new Mishnah is going to be dealing with wine, so therefore Shmamina ki Amar Rab l'chein le'eruv ahamas nisim kamar Shmamina. Says the Gemara, no, it is critical to ensure that we put Rav in the right place, because Rav wanted to make sure that we knew to include wine, and that's why Rav Yosef was of the opinion that we needed to ensure that Rav was appropriately attached to the Mishnah and not to the Brisa. Continuing the Gemara, about 15 lines or so from the bottom, Amar Mar uva mazon shtei seudos le'eruv, as we've pointed out a couple of times already, that the shear, the mazon for an eruv has to be shtei seudos le'eruv. Savar Rav Yosef l'meimar adiika seuda mehai useuda mehai. You might have thought that I need a shear of meat and I need a shear of fish, of two different things. Otherwise, it would be it wouldn't work. Like, let's say, for example, you'd have 10 different small portions that equal 2 Eruvin, but in and of themselves, none of them was really a full meal. So what's the volume of products that we need to ensure that the Eruv is actually viable? Can they be tiny things, 100 different pieces that add up, or no? So says the Gemara, Amar le Rabba, afilu lemechza, l'shlish v'le'erviha. It doesn't have to be 2 units. It could be as many units as we need, because as long as it equals to, think about your Shabbos meal. You get a little Shabbos, you get some chalent, you get some meat or chicken, you get a potato kugel, you get a salad, you get some side dishes, whatever they are. So there we don't say that the Suda has to be 1 piece. So says Rabba, don't worry. As long as that's l'shlish for the, as long as it's the mechza, the l'shlish for the revia, as long as it's broken up into small pieces, even if it's broken up into small pieces, no problem at all. The Gemara continues, Gufa Amar Rab, me'arvin b'shtei revi'iyos shel yayin. Says the Gemara, we are allowed to be me'arev with 2 revi'iyos of wine. We know halacha l'maisa that when we look into wine, there's a machlokas between the Chaz Nish and Rav Chaim Noah. How much do we assume that a revius is? So on the lower end, it's 3.3 ounces. On the higher end, it's 5+ ounces. Big nafkaminas for the Daled Kosos and for Friday night Kiddush v'chule. So says the Gemara, what's the shear for wine to make an eruv? And the Gemara answers, shtei revi'iyos shel yayin. We need 2 revi'iyos. Ask the Gemara, umi boin and kule hai. That's a lot of wine. Why do we need to have, I'm going to loosely use the number 10 ounces. So a lot of us pass like Rav Chaim, no? But let's say, why do I need so many? I'm just going to use the number 5 and 10. It's just easier. So why do I need 5? Why do I need 10 ounces of wine? Maybe I can only use 2 revi'iyos instead of saying that I should only have 1. We blame on kule. Hai v'atanya, the Brisa writes, Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, yain kedei lechol bo, chometz kedei l'tabel bo. Wine, we only need enough to drink at a normal meal. Chometz, vinegar is kedei l'tabel bo. People would dip their bread and they would dip it into this little vinegar dish. Zeisim uvetzalim, olives and onions kedei le'echol bohen shtei sutos. So there we see that yain is kedei le'echol bo, and people wouldn't drink that much wine during a normal meal, was the assumption of the Gemara. And so the Gemara, hasam b'chamra mevashla. No, there we need to, we're discussing in the Brisa that we just quoted in the name of Reb Shimon ben Elazar, there we're talking wine which was mevushal. This is a major sugya in Shas, a major sugya in Halacha. This does come up every once in a while. And says the Gemara as follows: Hasim b'chamra mevashla. Rashi, where is Rashi? Rashi is toward the bottom of the page, 5 lines from the bottom. Rashi says b'chamra mevushal ka'amar dechashuv lelafesbo. When you have wine that is mevushal, so then it was not used to drink like we're used to drinking it. Aval chamra be'alma. But when we talk about yain, which is not mevushal, says Rashi, va'ina lihios bo shesias beis seudos v'hainu beis revi'ios. Achakira. So here the Gemara says that when it's yain mevushal, that's not so chashuv. That's only used to be lalafes, just to kind of be used as a condiment. But when it's eino mevushal, that's a more chashuv wine. This is brought in Shulchan Aruch as it relates to whether or not it's appropriate to make kiddush, to do halachic aspects of wine, not just drinking wine stam at a meal, but halacha l'maisa. Let's say a person wants to make kiddush on yain she'eino mevushal. So the Shulchan Aruch quotes 2 opinions. The Rambam was of the opinion that one should only use yain mevushal. The Rama paskins l'kula, like other Rishonim, that we are allowed to, and it was customary for people to use even yain mevushal. And there are those who are makbid to only make kiddush on yain mevushal. Now, on yain she'eino mevushal. So that poses complications because, as we know, there's what we call stam yenam. That let's say you have wine that is not mevushal, and there is a goy or there's a mumar, someone who doesn't keep Shabbos, who's in the home, and they open the bottle for you. Pashut, you're not allowed. That's pashut. You're not allowed to drink that at all. So you need to have it in a way where you can guarantee that the yain she'eino mevushal has no access to a goy or to someone who's a mechal Shabbos or any other asur d'oraisa l'chora. If a person's a mumar, I'm makbid to wear shatnez, so then you're a mumar l'davar echad. You're down for the count. So that's one of the hints here to the Gemara about b'chamra mevashla. This is a beautiful support for the Rambam shita that one should be makbid because about using yain she'eino mevushal, because one of the things that we see here is that chamra mevashla is a lower level than chamra she'eino mevashla. That's what Rashi is highlighting here, and that's what the Gemara seems to say black on white. Amar Mar. The Gemara continues. Chometz kedei l'tabel bo. Vinegar is enough to dip into. Machlokes. Amar Rav Gidel. Amar Rav kedei l'tabel bo mazon shtei sudos shel yerek. How much liquid do I need to dip my vegetables into and eat them? So let's say 2 ounces, whatever the amount is. It's not that much. Ika de Amre. There's another version of how this statement of Rav Gidel was understood. 7 lines from the bottom. Chav tes amud aleph. Ika de Amre. Amar Rav Gidel. Amar Rav yerek hanechal b'shtei sudos. It's not the liquid that's doubled, it's the vegetables that are consumed with the liquid that's doubled. So let's say that the 2 ounces, that I have 10 pieces of lettuce. So for those 2 ounces then the 2 ounces isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about the lettuce that gets dipped into it. So that's 2 different versions of Rav Gidel's sheet in regards to the tabel b'mazon, in regards to chometz, in regards to vinegar. Continues the Gemara, 6 lines or so from the bottom. Amar Mar zeisim uvitzalim kedei lechol behen mazon shtei sudos. We said that in regards to olives, in regards to onions, that the shear is for 2 sudos. Asks the Gemara, uva betzalim mima arvin. Are you allowed to use onions to make an eruv? What's the problem? Vatanya, the Brisa writes, I'm Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Today's a Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar day. I'm Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Pamachas Shavas Rabbi Meir be'ardiska. This is a city. Rabbi Meir was Shavas. He was Kona Shvisa. This is where he was spending Shabbos. Fine. Uva Adam echad lefanav, and someone came to ask him a shaila. Amar lo Rebbe, irafti bebatzalim letivin. I was able to work on my Tchum Shabbos in such a way that in the city of Tivin, I put down some B'tzalim as my Shtei Sudos, as my Eruv, and I should be good to go. So says the Gemara, V'hoshivu Reb Meir Be'arba Amos Shelo. You and I are spending Shabbos together in these 4 Amos because you're not going anywhere. Namely, you cannot use onions to be Kona Shvisa. You cannot use onions to make an Eruv. So says the Gemara, Lo Kashya, this is not a difficulty. We said in our Gemara that it's mutter to use B'tzalim, and we see from Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar that it's not mutter to use B'tzalim. Answers the Gemara, ha be'olim, ha be'imahos. One is talking about the leaves, and one is talking about the imahos. One is talking about the bulbs or the actual flesh of the onion. And there's a difference between them. Which one's which? We'll see momentarily. The Tanya, as the Brisa writes, 2 lines from the bottom. Achal batzal v'hishkim v'meis ein omrim imames. If someone ate an onion and then they woke up and died, we don't even ask why they died. No need for an autopsy, because he ate an onion and the onion killed him. This is very shocking. Onions are everywhere, different kinds of them. They're all over the map. So what is this talking about? So let's see. We're only talking about the dangers of onions in regards to the alim, the leaves or the very thin layer on the outside of the onion. Aval be'imahos las lanba. But we're not talking about the flesh of the onion. That's not problematic. And let's limit it even more. Uva ala nami lo amran. Turning to the top of Chav Testament Beis, even by the leaves, it's not problematic. Ella de lo ivtzil zirta. If it doesn't grow to a particular size, about ivtzil zirta less lanba. But if it gets big enough, then it's not problematic. It's part of the growth process that when it's in stage 2 of 3, so stage 2 is dangerous, don't eat them at that point, the leaves. Otherwise, you're fine. Amar Papa, he's going to limit it still more. Second line, Chav Testament Beis. Amar Papa lo amran ella de lo ishte shichra. This is only true if you don't drink beer. So the limitations are manifold. It has to be the leaves. It has to be the leaves that are only grown to a certain size. It has to be that you didn't drink beer. So klalo shel davar, if you're going to be eating these onions that are in this space, you can just drink. You can just drink beer, and that would solve the problem. It doesn't solve other problems, but it may solve this problem. Tanu Rabbanan, 4 lines down, Chav Testament Beis. Excuse me. You should not eat onions because there's some type of nachash. It doesn't literally mean a snake. It just means like there's some type of venom, some type of poison that's inside the batzal, inside the onion. There was a story with Rabbi Chanina who ate a half of an onion, and included in that was half of the poison. And he got sick, but not alamus. He almost died. His friends davened for him, and he lived. Because this was what he needed at that time. The Mefarshim pick up on the weird language of mipnei shashat tzrichalo. What does that mean? Pashad, he needed help. Why would we not otherwise help? So their answer is lakan ulakan. It is a little bit of a strange language in the Gemara, because why do we need to explain why they're davening? He was sick, it's obvious. So some Mefarshim point out that he used to daven for others, so this was like a reciprocity. Fine, take a look at the Mefarshim. Says the Gemara at the 2 dots, 8 lines down or so, Chav Testament Beis, Amar Reb Zera, Amar Shmuel, Sheichar ma'arvin bo. You're allowed to use beer to be ma'arv. Uposel es hamikvah b'shloshes lugin. Not only that, but beer, if it was poured into a mikvah in shloshes lugin, that would be mifsal. It would ruin the mikvah. So maskef l'Rav Kahana, according to the Hagos Habach, the word pshita is removed. Maskef l'Rav Kahana b'chima bein zeh l'meitzeva. Why are you saying that beer ruins a mikvah? Any colored liquid ruins a mikvah. So who cares what it is? So why are you assuming that wouldn't work? It's not. Rabbi Yossi Omer made seba postlanas a mikvah b'shloshes lugin. So if we already have a din from Rabbi Yossi in a Mishnah that says that made seba postlanas a mikvah, that if you have colored liquid that's poured into a mikvah that it ruins it, well, I don't need you to tell me that beer is postlanas a mikvah, because beer is also a colored liquid. Every colored liquid would ruin a mikvah. So says the Gemara, how do we answer this? About 12 lines down, says the Gemara, Amre hasa maya detziva mikre, hacha shichra ikre. They have different names to them. They have a different shame, and maybe when they have a different shame, they'll have different halachos. So the reason why the Mishnah that we quoted speaks about beer passing a mikvah b'shloshes lugin was to make sure that we would not make the error of assuming that the fact that it's called shechar and not called meitzeva. So I might have thought, Havamina, that maybe the Sheikhar is different than the Meitzeva Kamash Malon. By writing the case of Sheikhar explicitly, black on white, I then know that it is considered to be a psul for the mikvah. Ubekama me'arvin, how much beer? Sava Ravacha, Berei de Rav Yosef, Kame de Rav Yosef. So what did Rav Acha say? He wanted to say, B'meimar betrain Revai Shichra, 2 revi'ios. That should sound familiar. That's how much we said was needed for the wine. So let's see, would we, just think on your own, forget the Gemara for just a moment. Would you have put wine and beer in the same category? Just an interesting thing. We already spoke about on the bottom of the previous page about the Shtei Revi'ios. We said that what we're talking about the Shtei Revi'ios is when we are dealing with Yain She'enu Mevushal. So beer doesn't have that status. So very interesting. So let's see how the Gemara deals with this. But first, we have to get into a bunch of Mari Makomos. What we're about to see now is an argument, a multi-layered argument as to why beer potentially should have Shtei Revi'ios just like wine. Says the Gemara, Kiditna, like the Mishnah writes, 1/3 of the way down, Chav Testament Beis, Hamotzi Yayin Kidei Mezigas Hakos. When one takes out wine, it should be for Mezigas Hakos. V'tani Allah Kidei Mezigas Kos Yafeh. You have to make wine the right way. My kos yafe, what's considered to be a good cup of wine? Kos shel bracha. And how do you make a kos shel bracha? Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua kos shel bracha tzarich sheyehebo rova revi'is. The revi'is is the final product. But how do you make proper wine? You take a quarter of a revi'is, so an eighth of the volume, and you put in the actual undiluted wine, and then you add in 3 parts of water. So the way we do this is that tzarich sheyehebo rova revi'is kadei sheyimzegenu v'yamod al revi'is. How do we get to a revi'is? So we take an eighth, and then we add 3 more eighths to equal the quarter. So it's 1 part wine, and 3 parts water. That's the right way to make wine. Uchede Rabba. This is like the opinion of Rabba. What did Rabba say? Dama Rabba kolchano delodari al chad tlas maya lav chanu. If you have wine that does not have this ratio, this dilution of 1 part wine to 3 parts water, that's not called wine. Vikatani seifa, and we learned that there as well. Ushe'ar kol hamashken berevis, v'chol hashovchen berevis. All other liquids should also be revis, and in regards to shofchen, if you're going to be pouring out liquids on Shabbos, this is a reference to what the shear of Isser would be, to carry that stuff out into Rosh Hashanah. How much you have to pour out of your cup to be chayav. There too, it's also revis. So midahasam al chad arba. I might have thought from here that the ratio is also 1 to 4, and the beer would needed a similar ratio to be chashuv, and therefore it should also be just like the wine, that it's shtei revi'iyos. Says the Gemara Velohi. That's a sophisticated svara, a multi-layered svara as to why beer should be treated like wine. But says the Gemara, nothing doing. Hasamhu de batir mehachi lo chashi. Wine is not the same as beer. Beer, people drink it the way certainly they did. People drink it differently. Even when you think about people who are like kind of the connoisseurs, they'll have a special kind of wine with a special kind of dinner. They'll pour a certain amount. Again, on a professional level, they're not like killing a wine bottle every time they sit down and drink it and measure. Beer is just a little different. The way we drink it is a little more socially, it's a little more casual. So the Gemara makes that type of distinction. Moving on to another sugya, although of course all connected. Tamarim bekama. What is the volume of dates to be used by an Eruv? Says the Gemara, Amar of Yosef, Tamarim bekab. It has to be that large amount. This was the amount we said by apples, according to the Havamina. Amar of Yosef, Mina Aminala. Where do I get the shear of kav from? The Tanya, the Brisa writes, Achal grogres v'shilim Tamarim. If a person ate dried figs and they paid back with ripe figs, with undried figs, right? Just fresh figs that are pulled off the tree without being dried, tavo alav bracha. That is what the Brisa writes, that if you pay back if I borrow a bag of dried fruit from you and I pay you back with whole fruit, undried, so there the Gemara says in the name of a Brisa, tavo bracha. Says Gemara, hechidami, what's the case? Ilema lefi damim, if I paid you back in an equivalent dollar amount, let's say I took $6 of dried fruit from you, and I paid you back with $6 in dates, says the Gemara, de'achal mine bizuza, I ate 1 zuz worth, become a shalem lebezuza, so I ate 1 of dried, and I pay you back 1 of fresh, my tavo alav bracha, all I did was trade with you. That's not tavo alav bracha. Tavo alav bracha is when you do something unique and special. So says the Gemara, bezuza achal, bezuza gam shalem. You did nothing unique at all. Says the Gemara, lalav, it must be lefimida. It was by volume. It was by volume. Dried fruit is smaller. So when you're giving back a different quality of food. Ta'achal mine griva de grogeris to shav yazuza. You ate a griva as a volume of food that is a grogeris of dried fruit and shav yazuza, and it's worth 1. The kameshalem le griva de tmarim de shave arba. You're paying back in volume, and when you're paying back in volume, then it's different because the volume of tamarim is not the dollar for dollar match. The volume of tamarim by its value is 4 times greater than an equal volume of dried dates. The katani tavola bracha alma tamarim adife. Therefore, we see that dates are better. Amar le'abai le'olam de'achal mine bezuza v'kama shalem bezuza. No, I don't agree with your approach that you're paying back by volume. It also raises concerns of was this a loan? You got to get into the ribbis shilas. Fine, let's assume that it wasn't a loan for now, and they were just kind of bartering. It's not so clear what's going on here. So Amar le'abai, no, we don't have to say your answer. Le'olam de'achal mine bezuza v'kama shalem lebezuza. You took a zuz worth and you paid back a zuz worth. However, umay tavo ala bracha. Why is it that you get a bracha? Because of market value. Not that you're paying them any differently, but you're paying them the same amount, but that same amount has the potential to grow. Says the Gemara, you ate something, namely dried figs, where the pricing doesn't really typically go up. Right now it's worth a zuz. And as well, you're giving back something that in fact does grow with the market. It's like giving $1 for silver and then paying it back with $1 for gold, with gold more likely to grow. Very, very similar, just a basic understanding of the market. Last sugya for tonight, says the Gemara, Shesisa. Shesisa is a liquid that we learned about in Maseches Shabbos. If you take a look at Rashi, 2/3 of the way down, Dibra Maschel Shesisa Michael Sheosin Mikemach Kelly is from toasted grains, and Shenisyabesh V'tanor, the Nosnin Dvash L'socha Tavshil, and you add in some honey to it. So it says the Gemara, Amar Avacha Bar Pinchas, Trey Shargushi. The shear is Trey Shargushi. Rashi Shargushi is Tarvad in 2 spoonfuls. Kisani, what is this talking about? Rashi says Kisani are kalayos, they're like dried nuts. Amar Abaye, Trey Bune de Pumbedisa. Second time we've seen this in Shas, this shear of Bune de Pumbedisa, 2 units, which were a shear that you'd have to live in Pumbedisa to know about. Amar Abaye, Amar Li Aim, famously Abaye didn't have a mother, this was a caretaker of some kind. Amar Li Aim, Hani Kisani, Malu Laliba Umevate Machshavta. It's these kisani, which again, as Rashi highlighted, were kilayos. They're nuts of some kind, good for the heart and good for your machshavos. They're able to help keep your brain a little bit more normal. Amar Abai Amar Li'aim, my caretaker said to me, if somebody feels like they have a weak heart, here's another approach. Laisa bisra de itma yemina de dichra. You should take meat from the right hip of a male animal. Sorry, I skipped a little bit. The lysi, and you should bring kibuye de reisa de Nisan. There should be some manure from the month of Nisan. The ileka kibuye de reisa. If you don't have that manure to use, then lysi sugiani de arvisa. You should bring twigs from an arava tree. The nichbeve, and you should burn them on a fire. The nechol venishte basre, and then you should eat and drink afterwards. Chamra marka. And you should eat the chamra marka. What does that mean? Rashi, 10 lines from the bottom says, Dibra Maskal chamra marka. You should drink some yain mazag. Again, as mentioned, these are not things that we should try at home. Sorry for the longer daf, just a lot of nuance and a lot of material. We're going to stop here for tonight. And Mirza Hashem will pick up tomorrow night, Tuesday night, with daf lamed. Wishing you all a beautiful night. Sorry for the last minute change in location. Kol tuv.